Si, senor.
And welcome everyone to another edition of the Spoiler Room. So glad you could join us tonight as we move through our She's Dietrich-iest month here, where we're looking at 4 films that have Marlene Dietrich in it. Now tonight, I fully admit she is not the main star in it. She just has a small part in it. But it was mostly an excuse to talk about this movie. But she is in it, so it does fit the theme.
All 5 minutes of her.
All 5 minutes. Shush, shush.
Was
Joe.
it that much? I mean,
And she's dressed up, so you don't even know it's her until about. Is that Marlene Dietrich?
Shush, it's part of She's Dietrich-iest month, and that's what I'm sticking by. So thank you for venturing down the stairs, pulling up a chair, and popping your favorite drink with us. Hopefully my computer problems hold off.
Happy November. We're doing a noir in November.
Yeah, it's a noir in November. There we go. And tonight I have a wonderful panel, a great assemblage of crew members to talk about this interesting Orson Welles film from 1958, Touch of Evil. You may have heard of it if you took any film class known to man. You may have heard Touch of Evil. Tonight, you may have heard of my panel from somewhere other than here. First off, we have from the Establishing Shot, he's back with us, Mr. Jeff York. Hello, Jeff. How you doing, sir?
Really good, thank you. Great to be here again.
Always glad to have you here to class up the joint, so thank you very much. And then we have the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Joe Randazzo's with us. Hello,
Hey,
Joe.
everyone. What's up?
Hey, Joe.
So glad to have you. And my right-hand man who keeps coming back for more. It is none other than the one and only Mr. Ian Simmons. Hey, Ian, how are you?
doing great right now.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. This is going to be an interesting conversation. So, yes, folks, 1958, directed by Orson Welles, who also stars in it, plus a cavalcade of stars at the time are in this noir film. And Joe, why don't you give us the synopsis of Touch of Evil?
Great establishing opening sequence where we get a guy who takes a bomb and puts it in the back of a car, and we're following the car, but we're also following Vargas and his wife as they keep crossing paths with the car. We know that there's a bomb in it. It's crossing this way. They keep somehow ending up at the same place at the same time, including at the border from Mexico into the United States. As soon as Vargas and his wife cross the border, they're walking past the border. The couple in the car drive past it, and like seconds after they pass it, the car explodes. Vargas is already established as being a known government officer. So basically, he tells his wife, "Okay, I know we had plans, but I got to go check this out." He leaves his wife alone, who's going to walk back to the hotel. And a couple of guys come up to her, and she's like, "I don't think you know who my husband is," but they're like, "No, we know exactly who your husband is." They hand her a note that says, "Follow this guy." She follows them to another motel that's run by the brother of someone that her husband has a case against. Basically, they want him to lay off, and she's like, "Yo, you might be able to intimidate me, but you're not going to intimidate him." In the meantime, another street punk tries to throw acid in Vargas's face. He calls him over, and this is while Quinlan and Orson Welles' Quinlan and all the other cops who have just crossed the border, and they have no jurisdiction there, but they feel like, what the hell? We're tourists asking questions. We're not here officially. They witness all this, but it's kind of peculiar that they don't do anything about it. Like, they don't seem to care. And we start to kind of unravel why. So, wow, there's so much going on already. I'm like 2 minutes.
Actually, Joe, what you're unwittingly getting at, if I dare say to interrupt, is it all connects.
It does all
seem like it's all kind of random, and well, what does it have to do with that? And this seems obtuse, and no. that's kind of the fun of the thing, is that it all kind of connects and these characters keep crossing paths. And Wells literally started that to basically show that that is the theme of this film, and continuing to use his camera to kind of underline the fact that this labyrinth of corruption and cartels and officers, some good, some not so good, are all sort of snaking together in this kind of weird weaving of overlapping and connection. Which you were saying.
I mean,
the
thing is, like, I'm describing it because I'm like, what am I?
That's the charm of it, essentially, or
so
supposed to be the charm of it.
Especially in those first 20 minutes, there is so much going on.
Yeah.
And every second, it seems like there's a new thread that opens up, and it actually does tie together amazingly.
He does bring it together, and that surprises me. I've seen bits and pieces of it. I've never actually, this was the first time I actually sat through the whole thing. Because when I switched majors to video production, I took American film class, and go figure, we talked about the opening scene of Touch of Evil, the infamous tracking shot that, done in 1958, had to have been a technical nightmare. With a big camera like that,
very well.
Just the wrangling of all the extras had to have been maddening.
And the stop and start of the cars and the goats and all. And you've got live animals in there. My goodness.
And the film, I think, starts off stronger than it ends. In all honesty, when I watch it, but it was still a very interesting watch, especially for some of the casting, which we'll go to in a minute. But
well, I don't know if you could have kept up that pace all the way through, because I think
but it's not just the pace. It's just some of the choices. When I was watching it, I'm like, okay, I really want to be really enjoying this film, but there's part of me that just was nagging at the back of my head, going, this is a decent film, and there's some really cool cinematography and stuff going on, and the story itself is okay, but I have some questions. But we'll get into that. But overall, I can see why why this is talked about so much. And in the end, I didn't feel like I wasted my time, but at the same time, and we'll get into the other details, there are some things when you get into the weeds and that with this film that just brought up a number of questions, even for 1958 Mexico. We'll just get your top level feelings before we dive into it. Joe, how do you feel about Touch of Evil?
I love it. This is the first time I've seen the theatrical version, though, because I own a DVD with 3 versions on it, and I'd only seen the restored version, which is 119 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that might be, unfortunately, it's been a couple years since I've seen that one, so I don't remember any of the stuff that I didn't see tonight. I also wish I would have realized that I had this in there, which is apparently a reproduction of the 58-page memo that Orson Welles sent to Universal after seeing the initial cut. Had I realized this was in there before today, I would have read the whole thing and been able to go, okay, yeah, Mark, he addresses that on page 17 of the memo. But yeah, I still love this movie, and I don't know if maybe the reason is because some of the questions you might have are like automatically filled in because I've only seen a version that's about 20 minutes longer.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe that, but unfortunately I can't like really think of what specifically was missing. But I've loved this movie probably since film school. And I think like you, like the teachers all told me, you gotta watch like that opening sequence. It's one of the greatest things ever. And yeah, it absolutely is. I love how evil and ugly Orson Welles is in this. Like God, yeah. This isn't movie star Orson Welles. He is down in the dirt here for this, and it's fantastic. He's disgusting, vile, a racist. Yeah. Like he's basically checking all the boxes of why we shouldn't like him, and he does everything in his power to come across as just like the lazy cop who may have been a great cop in his youth, but now takes every shortcut and doesn't care if he's got to. It's the old joke. You're more likely to get shot by a fat cop if you run. It's
No.
Wow. Woo, I just
I've
like to
never
say
heard that
that.
one. That's great.
I just like to say the opinions of Joe Randazzo did not reflect the opinions of the spoiler room out to our law enforcement out there who may imbibe on too many donuts. Anyway, what? Oh wait, I shouldn't have said. Okay, never mind. I'm gonna
Disclaimer
stop
number
now.
2.
This episode of the Spoiler Room brought to you by Stan's Donuts.
Mm.
Do try our pumpkin spice donut in season now.
Ooh, now I want some donuts. Thanks a lot. I did that to myself.
Donut.
Yeah, I think Orson Welles as the villain is what kind of carries this movie
Yeah.
more than anything.
For
Oh,
sure.
absolutely.
I love Charlton. I love watching Charlton Heston. But yeah, Orson Welles was so amazing in his time, and he deserves every accolade he's gotten over time as a director, but also as an actor. One of the greatest ever. Yeah, I guess it's just my just
Your overall feeling.
yeah, my
with it,
overall
yeah.
feeling of the film.
Jeff, what about you and your feeling with Touch of Evil?
I like it a lot. I think it's in some respects it might be a film that is a better in parts than the sum of its parts. And I think part of what hurts the film by today's standards is we've seen so many procedurals and mysteries. And, in 1958, when this one was done, it was a little more novel. There wasn't, dozens and dozens and dozens of cop shows on and all this stuff. I mean, I think they said by the time somebody's 18, these days a child has probably seen something like 2,000 murders on television, and that's because of police procedurals and stuff. So in some respects, the revelations in here I don't think are as they probably were in 58. But I think as a noir and a film that is using the camera and the sound and the sort of interconnection between characters and moving in scenes, and yet sometimes they're staying connected in the scene even if somebody's in the background because they're trying to say this person is still part of that. Those things are very interesting. It probably works in some respects, I think, better as a film study than an actual, hey, this is an entertaining 2 hours of the movies. But I think it's fascinating for a number of reasons. And again, as we talk about on your show as well as Ian's show, and that is, I think context is sort of everything in a way. This was that era when, or did I say error? Maybe error or era, when, Yul Brynner played the King of Siam, and, Charlton Heston was playing a Mexican prosecuting, investigator or whatever he was. It's like, wow, at least they got the hair right. But, things like that look a little bit like, wow, can we watch this film today? Of course we can. And let's stop being so woke. But it is a little odd that this is sort of how these things are done. I mean, the worst was probably, of course, when Laurence Olivier did the big movie, the screen version of Othello. So go figure. But that's how it was done for centuries on the stage as well.
Wells did it too, actually.
So I think to your point, I think in some respects, Orson Welles sort of did with this almost the first sort of Bond villain or celebrity villain or really great, almost sort of dominating the movie bad guy in a way, because he was very verbose. He talked a lot. And to Joe's point, he was made up and had this very distinct suit and hat, and it was a white hat, which is of course counter to him not being quite the white hat. Even had a bad putty nose on, so he was kind of unrecognizable, though that rumbling timbre of his is very recognizable. And this was also when Janet Leigh was a big thing in film, and kind of fun to see her in a role that was a little edgier than some of the ones she got handed as actresses did in those days. But I think it's dated, and I think the only version I've seen is the '98 version, and in some respects, that movie's experience was probably better as well than the entirety of the movie, because it's like, wow, they restored it, and it's written and it's done to the notes that all those 58 instructions that Wells had given, and they took the Henry Mancini score off. They took the credits off the front so you can see what's actually going on in the first 10 minutes of it, and it's pretty impressive. And Universal had screwed up the edit so much, and I'd seen parts of that when I was in film history class. And in '98 it came out. It was a restored copy, and it was a restored soundtrack. Walter Murch worked on it. He was the big thing, winning a sound and editing Oscar 2 years earlier for The English Patient. And it was kind of wonderful to see it all again. Though I think, as I said at the beginning of this, I think the parts are probably more fascinating, including that part of the story and its restoration, than maybe the entirety of the movie, at least compared to us now here 40 years hence, 50, well, more 60 years, whatever it is.
Almost
Hence,
70.
the 70. Oh, there you go.
Almost
70. All right,
yeah,
70
almost
years.
70.
Shit, 70 years.
Almost.
But I mean, even since 98, it's been, how many years? And we've seen so much since then that I think makes this recede a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And Ian, what about you? Was this your first time watch, and what'd you feel about it?
Yeah, it was my first time watching it. As I was telling Jeff a bit during the pre-show, my only context for this was the movie Get Shorty, in which John Travolta's character goes to see Touch of Evil in a movie theater, and they watch like the last 5 or 10 minutes of it, and it's a fascinating little bit of a film. But yeah, I watched it today. I had to break it up into like 3 parts, and I'm glad I did, because I was having a real hard time with this movie. I refer to it as Touch of Zequel. I was so bored watching this movie. Sorry.
Big summer next tonight and sleep.
How
Wash it
dare
down
you?
with some Parmesan while you're at it.
How dare you be a film critic and be critical of Touch of Evil?
Look, I went during one of my breaks, I looked up the score on Rotten Tomatoes. Sure enough, 97%. And I think that's like there's one person who dissented out of all the people, maybe 2, but I didn't scroll that far. But no, I mean that's the problem. Is, to Jeff's point, context is key. I kept having to remind myself, Ian, go back to 1958. No one's seen this, people haven't seen movies quite like this before. Right. It's impressive, it's groundbreaking, it's cool. But 2024, Ian is like, whatever is going on with Dennis Weaver's character, no, that's a completely different movie, and it's god awful. What the whole thing with Janet Leigh's Susan character, when she gets kind of brought in to meet Grandy and his goons, she like goes beyond mouthing off to the point where I'm like, I bet the whole movie is going to be like, oh, they shoot her dead, and then like Charlton Heston gets revenge or something, because like I'm like, lady, I know you think that these guys can't touch your husband, but they can definitely touch you. And yeah, it's great. He won't stop until he comes after all of you. I'm like, yeah, but it'll be because you're dead, so stop that. And then later in the motel, when she's surrounded by goons once again, all of a sudden she's scared. I'm like, I don't know who this character is. On top of that, we've got our Vargas, our prosecutor guy, who leaves his wife in a motel out in the middle of nowhere. He finds out pretty early on who runs that motel, and he does not immediately go and get her. And later, when he does go out there, he's spending all this time in the front office with Dennis Weaver's character with the lights out. And then like after 10 minutes, then he goes to his wife's room. Like, buddy, what's going on here? Nothing in this movie makes any sense. But Orson Welles is the reason to watch this movie. He is amazing. I haven't watched The Penguin, but I've seen, Colin Farrell and the makeup and everything. This reminds me of that. It's a completely transformative experience. We've come a long way in terms of the prosthetics and things like that, but even on the close-ups, when you see the weird wrinkles in his like cat-like eyes, and he's just so broken and corrupted and ugly. I was reminded of Eckhart from 1989 Batman.
Yes.
I thought for sure Tim Burton was referencing
I'm sure
Touch of Evil in that character.
He references this movie in Ed Wood.
Yeah.
The Orson Welles.
We were talking about
He
that.
goes,
Yeah, we were talking about that a bit
meeting in
before.
Universal, and they want Charlton Heston to play a Mexican.
Which is actually, I was telling Ian earlier, so I'm going to use it to inform your listeners, Mark. That's a cheap shot, because Charlton Heston was a big star then, and he was cast as the character, and he was the one who asked that they get Orson Welles to rewrite it and direct it. And because of his connection to the NRA at the time, and I think his conservative politics, he was an easy punchline on certain levels. Or maybe we thought he was a little bit of that overacting kind of school with some of the things he did. Though I think he was a very, very good star actor in a number of films. But that was a little unfair of Ed Wood to make that joke when that's not actually the case at all.
And I think, kind of to that point, like,
as much as I loved Ed Wood, but
I
still.
love
Yeah.
it too.
Oh yeah, but I mean, here's the thing. I know he had lobbied to change the ethnicity of his character because he was originally going to just be like an American DA or whatever, but he wanted to be a Mexican. That's fine because it's black and white, so you can tell they put some makeup on him to slightly darken his skin. It's not completely offensive. I mean, I think he looks the part. But he, much like Kevin Costner in that Robin Hood movie, he makes no effort to put on any kind of accent.
Yeah.
So the only thing I'm thinking of, and this could have been fixed in a line of dialogue, and maybe it's one of these other cuts, but he's Mexican, but maybe his parents were, maybe he's mixed or something like that.
Or he was raised in the States and then moved back to Mexico or something. So he
Something like
seems very
that.
American, because he seems very American to your point, Ian, in this.
Right,
Even when he
he's
says,
great.
"You know what? I haven't done in an hour. I haven't kissed you." I mean, really?
Well, that's the
last
tough
person
part.
I kissed was an ape scientist, and gee God, I was the ugly one.
And
That was
that's
many years later. Sorry.
that was, but I think that was part of me trying to, like Ian, I think that was part of me. I love noir, and I love the look of this. I love the technical aspects of it. Yeah, everything you guys said. Orson Welles looking like a villain. Like, I mean, you look at him and you go, yeah, he's a bad cop. I mean, there's no like, oh no, he's a good cop and he just kind of looks bad. No, the minute you see him, you're like, yeah, no, he does shady shit. Yeah,
And he's
we know.
really smart and really manipulative. Like the scene
yeah.
where he knows that Vargas is talking to the higher ups about him. He goes over there and he throws his little tantrum. He throws his badge and he's like, "If you're even gonna question me, then I don't even want the badge." And he is so goddamn good.
Oh, he is good. No, I mean I agree with
he
Ian.
is so fantastic.
He is definitely the reason to watch this. It was Charlton Heston's casting. I was trying to, but he has Charlton Heston's voice, like you guys said. He at no way is even slightly changing. And I'm not even talking about he needs to be a heavy accent, but Heston has that unique, identifiable voice. So when you see it coming out of the character that he's supposed to play and that he's made up to look like, you're like, this just doesn't fit. It's got a kind of a disconnect to it, not on purpose, but just my brain is just like, okay, I'm hearing this voice, but I'm seeing this character. It's just not matching for me.
But can Heston do any other voice? I don't think I've ever heard him and sound any other way. Every film I've ever seen him in, he's Charlton Heston.
Right.
Which is weird because, again, he lobbied to make this change to the character. It's not like someone else came in and said, "Okay, Charlie, you got to play a Mexican." And he's like, "I can't do that. I'm sorry." I mean, that's the thing is like I feel like they included that primarily so that the Wells character could get in his digs about like how he doesn't trust Mexicans or whatever, and he's very, very unkind. But I mean, there's so many Mexican like players and characters in this movie that you could very easily have him say that about practically anybody else in the cast. It's just a bit of an odd fit.
And I understand it's 1958, but we're still talking about Mexico having a reputation of if you're from North America, you're from America, not exactly having the best experience. And if you turn down the wrong alley and whatnot, bad things could happen and whatnot. There was still kind of that reputation back then. So her just deciding to go, it's like, I'm looking at this going, your husband is a prosecuting DA. Has he not taught you anything about don't go off? And I understand them
But don't you think it's funny in the very first scene, they're walking in the street. They're not walking on the sidewalk. They're walking in the street.
Yeah.
And they constantly are sort of bobbing and weaving around these cars that are driving by them and, the size of a boat. And
I mean, we're just talking
as they're all stumbling towards the
to be fair, he does say
border.
that it's the border towns that are like this.
Right.
He doesn't say all of Mexico's like this. He's the border towns in any country are going to be rough.
Right. And I understand that. And I get that it's rough. Then even more so, she shouldn't just go with some rando who claims that they've got a message for her husband. That was kind of the part.
Especially a shady looking one like this one.
Especially some guy who looks like a lost brother of John Travolta's character from Grease. I mean, like a true 50s greaser. And he comes up and he says, "Oh, here's a message. We've got a message for your husband." I think I could have believed it more if the guy would have just showed up at, like, say, the lobby of the hotel that they were in or whatnot. But the fact that out on the street, she gets this letter and just goes with this guy because they have a message with, I'm like, wow, I understand it's 58, but not even Mexico, even just maybe it's because I grew up in the city, but no, you don't just.
Well, I think the other problem is that it's Janet Leigh. I mean, and she's very well put together, and she doesn't seem naive. She seems like a woman with a head on her shoulders. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's just me projecting onto this character or what, but yeah, it seemed very out of place. On top of that, well, maybe it makes sense because Mike Vargas is no great shakes either. Later on,
yeah,
when Susie wakes up in that room and she sees that, again, this is the spoiler room. So Grandy has been strangled and his body has been left kind of hunched over the bed, bed frame, with his eyes bugged out. It's that's some chilling shit. The way the light hits those bloodshot eyes. Mm-hmm. She wakes up, she freaks out. She runs to the balcony with like a sheet wrapped around it, and she starts screaming, "Help, help, I've been attacked," or whatever. And there's a crowd gathering, and they're like pointing, and there's a whole commotion. And right then, Mike Vargas comes tooling up in his car, and like, oh, this is the part where he runs up and wraps his arms around her and gets her out of that town. But no, he walks into the bar because he apparently didn't recognize that his wife, his wife is right there in the balcony. Yeah, what's going on here? And then he goes into the bar, is like, "Where's my wife?"
Well, there's a couple other, to your point about making sense, that are a little unforgivable too. Like, he just happens, Quinlan happens to leave the cane. It's just a little bit obvious in that kind of stuff where you're almost wanting it to be a slightly more subtle thing that's discovered.
It would have
but
been,
it was years before. I mean, the only person who could really do that in those days was either, Conan Doyle or Christie. And this isn't quite, with those kind of thoughts into the secrets and the surprises within the narrative. It's a little obvious, but I think more than that, I think what probably Wells was going for was to make this interweaving tale of corruption and stupidity and missing and maybe human fallibility, and somehow it all links and connects. And to your point about Vargas, he isn't really the sharpest blade in the drawer, and he's putting his wife in danger, and he's a little easily flummoxed by some of these things. And then I think in some respects, the most ironic thing is at the end when we discover who planted the bomb, and it was that Sanchez, and in some respects, all of what Quinlan had doing all these machinations of covering things up and trying to get ahead of the scandal and get on top of it and save himself and his compatriots, that was a little unnecessary, because there was a better answer that was right off the bat, sort of the answer that we kind of knew. But I think that's the irony of this too, is that it's all this graft, all this corruption, all this interconnected shit that is going on, this corruption that kind of infiltrates and poisons everything, and maybe even, the honeymoon of Vargas and his wife, and their sort of maybe happiness as she's being threatened and terrorized and even thought to be a murderer. But some of the actual storytelling, to Ian's point, does not hold up to much scrutiny. It's like, really? Is that what the character would do? Really? He's got all this stuff figured out, but he leaves the cane behind. I will give Wells credit for this. In the one scene, we should probably get to Marlene Dietrich, Mark. I don't know.
Oh, we will.
Yeah,
okay.
we should.
I was going to say, I love the fact that Wells wrote himself a line where she goes like, "Boy, you've changed. You should eat less candy. You should have less candy bars or left the candy bars." It's like, nice.
No,
It's like,
back to
you
it too later on.
one take on that, Marlene, because I really don't want to be insulted repeatedly.
She calls
Jeff,
back to
I
it
think-
later
I
on
think-
too with another line where she says something like, it's something. Was it about drinking? And she's like, no, he switched to candy bars or something like that. It's
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
exactly
That's
wrong.
right. Exactly. Those
But,
candy
I
bars.
think,
The twist that he did it in the that it was Sanchez in the end is. He's just lazy. He's just like, I got a gut feeling that it's him. I don't want to do any police work. Plant the dynamite on him.
Yeah.
But I think, and that's something that I think a more modern. I don't know if has this movie ever been remade?
I don't believe so.
No,
because
it's one of those that it really isn't touched because of the technical aspect. I don't think. Yeah.
I think Wells also might have had it in a lot of his contracts that you can't touch my movies, because I remember that was one of the big things at the Orson Welles estate when Ted Turner was colorizing everything. Supposedly, he said right before he died to whoever was handling his estate to keep Ted Turner and his goddamn Crayolas off my movie. So I think there was something in the Orson. There might have been something in his contracts that, yeah, these movies are mine. You can't touch them.
That reminds me of the In Living Color sketch where they had Jim Carrey playing Ted Turner, and he presented his truly colorized classics where he had like Casablanca, but it was starring the Wayans brothers.
Well, it's funny too. They were going to do that's right. They were going to do they were going to have the film restored, play at Cannes in '98, and one of those kind of contract things that you talked about, Joe screwed it up because they were supposed to get his family's approval of this, and so his daughter, not knowing what they had done, sort of protested. And at the last minute, they had to pull it from a special screening. And a lot of people had gone to Cannes that year, thinking that they were going to see this restored masterpiece to the way it was supposed to be done. And then, of course, after she sees it, when it's released in the States and all different places, and Siskel and Ebert did a show on it and trumped it up. And that's where I saw it. I was on the Fine Arts Theater here in Chicago in '98. Then she liked it. And then, well, if I'd known, I wouldn't have complained. But you're right. Orson Welles had some stuff in his contracts, probably after the Magnificent Ambersons got butchered by the studios.
Yeah, that's another one.
I think he just insisted on it. Can I tell you a quick story too about him? Just it's a random,
Go for it.
Random story, but you'll get a kick out of it. One of the things Orson Welles lived off for many years was, in addition to the Paul Masson commercials and seeming to be on the dais.
I was going to say wine, but yeah,
he was on the dais every other Dean Martin roasted scene. But he would often give interviews and these kind of prestigious things, and want to be paid, or at least be paid through lunch. And what he used to do with reporters is he would say, "Well, long man, let's meet at Le Cirque at 1 o'clock, and I'll give you an hour of time and you can buy me lunch." He would go there an hour and a half earlier and buy himself a lunch, and then say to the waiter, "Now don't bring the bill to the table until after I've left, after meeting with this reporter." So he'd get 2 lunches, and then the reporter would get this bill. It's like, wait a minute, 2 bottles of champagne. We didn't have champagne. And wait a minute, who had roast duck? And that was the first lunch that he had before the reporter came. Like, well, if I'm going to sit, I'm going to sit.
Wow.
I thought he and I were kindred souls, because when I was in New York a couple months ago doing the Troma movie, when I was meeting up with any friend of mine in Brooklyn, I was like, I'm gonna, and I messaged Shanta. I was like, yeah, I have 4. I miss New York pizza so much that I have 4 meetings in Brooklyn, and all of them are people buying me pizza.
How very Orson Welles of you!
I didn't realize it until now. I knew this man and I had some kind of connection.
Joe, Paul Masson casts his bottles of wine like he's casting a party. If you were going to have that much pizza, then you could certainly reach for perhaps a Cabernet Sauvignon or maybe even a Merlot.
Those
Something with a
outtakes.
hearty red to go with
Those
that
outtakes are the
sausage
best
pizza.
thing on YouTube. If anyone watching this has not seen them, Orson Welles is like sitting there like this, like looking like he's about to pass out. Action, Orson. The French champagne.
Yes, it was when Paul Masson was making champagne. And the best part about those clips is not only is he plastered because he's already had too many bottles before they, getting to the Orson, you got to remember the lines we gave you. It's only 5. Come on. But like the couple keeps pouring the champagne next to him and they're perfectly in character. Like they're not breaking. They know he's erratic. He's screwing up. He's drunk off his gourd, but we're going to be the good extras here.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I mean, with Touch of Evil, you can see the talent of Orson Welles. And I think while we've been talking tonight and talking about Vargas and Janet Leigh, don't get me wrong. I love Janet Leigh, obviously Psycho. I love her, watching her. And even in this, I didn't mind her in it. I think it was written weird, or edited weird from what it sounds like with what the original version was. And Heston as Vargas. But if you kind of think about it, you could tweak this in such a way to where you don't need the Vargas storyline in this film. In all honesty, you could follow this Quinlan and how this seems to be his night of his demise, and just watching him make misstep after misstep, falling off the wagon. And because the relationship that I enjoy more than the whole Vargas couple is the relationship between Marlene Dietrich's character and Quinlan. Those scenes that they have, I love those scenes because I love this talk between them and how they are towards each other. Like, this is an older couple who have a history, and they just a few lines back and forth, and you feel that history between them, because Marlene Dietrich is really good in the scenes she's in with this, and Orson Welles is good. And so when you get those two together in those scenes, I'm like, I want to see more of this, because the Quinlan character is complex. But then we go back to, the Vargas family, and you're just like, in all honesty, I don't care about the Vargas. I want to know more about, Quinlan and his relationships and his connections, his buddy too, his partner who's been covering him for years, who's feeling
he was very
guilty,
good in this too. That relationship was interesting.
And growing a conscience,
I think I get what you're saying, Mark, but I don't quite think that's the answer. I think the answer is to strengthen the Vargas couple, make them more believable characters who don't do stupid things and get themselves further into trouble. I think what makes Quinlan such a great presence is that he is punctuation. He's not the entire sentence. He shows up and has these moments where he kind of throws away his badge, to Joe's point. That scene in the hotel where he kills Grandy, and but not before having him call the police, and Janet Leigh's tied up she's passed out on the bed. I mean, that is truly shocking and horrifying, that whole bit, because you think, oh, he's this fat slob detective, he probably couldn't even shoot straight if he wanted to. But when the lights are out in that room, and you've got Grandy, who is himself kind of an intimidating figure to a lot of the other minor characters in the movie, when he's running scared and he can't get away from this lumbering, hulking force coming at him in this small room, I mean, it's claustrophobic. It's beautiful. So yeah, I don't know that there needs to be that much more to this character. I like that he just kind of comes in, does his thing, and then the end part where they're walking around and they're trying to get him to confess on the wire, that I think it kind of fizzles out, because I really did feel like I was watching Orson Welles trying to get footage of himself delivering lines while he was plastered, because I'm like, just say it and let's end this damn thing.
Yeah, that part was a little rough. I mean, his buddy couldn't be more obvious. That's why he calls out, that thing you're wearing, and it's just like, yeah. I mean, his buddy couldn't be worse at trying to get a confession out of his friend subtly. There's no subtlety about him. Why do you keep bringing up Vargas? Quinlan's just like, what the fuck? He's like, I'm a veteran. I know exactly what you're doing, but at this point in my life, I don't care. And that's what. And that's the thing is, I am fascinated by the Quinlan character, and it's exactly what you guys have been saying tonight, especially you, Ian, and Jeff. You mentioned as well the sum of the parts altogether of this film, at least of this cut, is a little rough to watch. But if you just take the segments of the scenes, the sequences by themselves, they're wonderful. The sequence, yeah, when she's passed out on the bed and you've got Quinlan forcing what's his name to call the cops,
Grandy.
Grandy, to
Yeah.
call the cops, and that, there's no real music except for the background. It's just quiet. It's like, tension filled. This is like Hitchcockian almost. Like, it's just like, oh man, I feel the tension. Or when the vagabonds, the beatniks, come into Janet Leigh's room, and you have the whole beatniks, and first you have the guys in there, and then you have the ladies show up, and you're like, oh, the ladies are gonna, oh no, they're in with the guys.
Yeah, we want to watch. Yeah,
And they want to that sequence, a lot of tension, a whole lot. And so you take these sequences you have, and like we mentioned, the opening sequence, great tension in those. But when you piece them together as the story, or like I said with Tanya, with Marlene Dietrich and Quinlan, talking about their history or whatnot, and being in not so many words talking about their history, great scenes. But when you piece them together, it doesn't quite flow for me. But if I just take those sequences, those scenes by themselves, they're wonderful. It's just when you put them.
Let me ask this though, because you mentioned the hotel scene with the the punks and Janet Leigh. Especially when the girls, they do want to, watch what's about to happen.
Sure.
And when they say grab her legs, then when it cuts to the hotel later, and there's just kind of chitter chatter about like, oh, they didn't actually do anything to her. They just kind of roughed her up to make it look like something happened, and they blew, pot smoke on her to make it look like it was a drug thing. In any of the other cuts, was it ever implied that something did happen to her? Because I thought that was just a really odd choice to go through all of that just to bring her back to that hotel.
Hays Code. No, just kidding.
Well, I'm not sure. That's a good question.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's been a while since I've seen the original, the restored version. This is the original version.
I know what you're saying, Ian, because it felt for the way the rest of this film is and the tone, especially at that point in the movie, and for what they had been building up, what these guys were going to do to her and build it up to pay back Vargas and really get back at him, to suddenly say, oh, we just roughed her up a bit and we blew pot smoke against her clothing or whatnot. I'm like, I was kind of like you. I'm like, granted, don't get me wrong. I don't want bad things to happen, but within the context of the story, it almost seemed out of character that that's what they did versus what is implied initially when you see the door get shut.
Right, because I mean the whole way that is shot of her, close-ups of her terrified on the bed, people constantly like streaming into the room, the lights all messed up, and then grab her legs. If they wanted to just kidnap her, they could have just like shoved a bag over her head or knocked her out or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, it just seemed almost like a cop-out. Like you brought up the Hays Code kind of in jest, but I was thinking at some point did someone say, look, she was knocked out, nothing really happened.
Yeah, I'm sure they
we
did.
have to release this.
Yeah, they had to be very careful about a lot of that kind of stuff in those days. I mean, even like in West Side Story in '61, when Steven Spielberg redid the scene, you get the idea that the Jets are maybe going to rape Anita when she comes to deliver that news to Tony. In the '61 version, they toss her around a little bit, and it looks more like bullying and hassling than it necessarily reads as like one more minute and she might have been on the floor and then Doc wouldn't have been able to save her. I think you get that still, and maybe people were smarter in those days, but yeah, you had to be, to your point, Ian, and the joke about the Hays Code is they had to be very careful about some of that kind of stuff that they could maybe hint at a little bit, but not too much.
And that was part of that too, because I mean the way they set it up, again, you don't necessarily want to, but in the for the sake of the story and the way it's implied and the way they build that up to where it's like, oh, we keep going back to them playing the music louder, and the guys are in the office answering the phone, posing as a day clerk, and all. You're like, okay, so when you finally get to that everything culminates to that scene in the room, and then even you're moving the camera out through the door frame, and they say get her legs, and you see her grabbing their ankles and moving her into an unpleasant position, and then the door slowly closes. I'm like, oh, this really got dark. And then we cut later, like, no, we roughed her up and we just made it look like she was on drugs, and then blew smoke. And I'm like, okay. And then the other thing too, when the cops were like, yeah, she's going to be framed for the murder of great. I'm like, okay, look at Janet Leigh and look at him. You're saying.
And why would she do it anyway? Why would she do that?
And then the whole idea
it's kind of
of
shitty writing in a way.
And the whole idea of the track marks and such and that. I'm like, they all had to be fresh. It's not like they've been injecting her for like a week.
Exactly.
I'm like, you're telling me that these guys are just buying this, like, Well,
I think that if I had to cast my mind forward to the alternate future of this movie, where she was, they broke in, they saw the body, they saw her. Very easily you can concoct a story where there was some kind of like a romantic interlude, and things got a little bit rough and she ended up strangling him. Now, granted, it could be a self-defense thing, but also because of the degrees of corruption we've seen in this town, you say, well, we got her fingerprints, we got someone saying that she was like berating him because, hey, think about this. We have a group of witnesses that saw her yelling and being very unpleasant to this guy earlier that day. So there's that kind of, maybe she did attack him. It's not hard to imagine it, but I'm kind of glad they didn't go there. But yeah, they're just the factors that I've mentioned already. The balcony scene, it seems like there's so much potential that was squandered in favor of, like Jeff said, not the best writing. When I asked if this had ever been remade, even if you can't officially remake it as Touch of Evil, I'd like to see someone tackle this kind of a story and kind of tighten it up a bit, even make it a period piece. I don't want to see this set in 2024, but a period piece very cool.
Well, you couldn't have it in 2024 because you couldn't get over the border that freaking easy.
I know. I was going to say, it's like that one guy is like not even checking your trunk and everything else. Like when was this?
And I could say like what 20 some years ago it was a lot. 30. Oh fuck, I'm old. Okay, 30 years ago almost. It was a lot easier to cross even from the U.S. into Canada. I back in the day, I was literally 19 years old. I was doing an internship at the aquarium at the Niagara Falls on the American side. And this is just before I became a video production major, but I already had the internship planned and everything. So I went anyway for the experience. Great experience. But anyway, me and my fellow student, who happened to be the daughter of my fourth grade teacher, we were not 21, but Canada drinking age was 18. So we planned a night. We walked across the bridge, waved to the custom guys, they waved back, and we just kept walking. They didn't check IDs, they didn't check anything. It was kind of like what they did here with the border crossing, is where I'm going with Touch of Evil, is they literally walk up to the gate. Oh yeah, how you doing? Yeah, here you go. Okay, yep, move along. Yeah. And so I just found that amusing, that this border town is just like, bloop, oh yeah, we just walk over here and then we're gonna walk back, and oh yeah, these cops just happen to cross over. It's not their jurisdiction, but whatever. See, and the corruption thing, I could almost believe that, her setup, and they talk about the track marks. Okay, somebody's forging something, but we do have a couple what seems to be not corrupted officials that are also in charge here. You know what I'm saying? So some of the things that they brought up that were supposed to be framing could have easily been, they could have looked at it and gone, oh yeah. Yeah. You know, even if Quinlan is insisting, but so that was a little bit tough, but you know, that aside, there still are a lot of great things that I enjoyed about this, including, like I mentioned, Marlene Dietrich. Let's not forget, Zsa Zsa Gabor shows up in here as the owner of the strip club.
She gets named in the opening credits, and she has one line.
As a guest star, which I always
As a
found
guest star.
a weird credit in a movie is guest stars. Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
there's not another one, so
I had that problem too, Joe. TV is fine because it's an episodic thing. Oh, someone's coming in for a moment, but yeah, in a film, they're just in the movie. There's no guest
yeah,
star
they're just
about
part
it.
of the
Right.
movie.
Yeah.
Well,
You're not a guest.
Well, I think that's why they changed the wording at some point, instead of guest star to being and featuring, and it'd be the biggest name like we get in the movies at the end, to where they might have one,
Also
two
starring.
scenes, huh? But
Also
yeah,
starring.
also starring, where
Or
you get
sometimes
a
you get the end.
Or
So
you
and
get
so
the you
right.
get
With.
the person
With.
naming their character, you know, and so as
Right.
Yeah.
Malarkey or whatever, you know. What?
as so and so
Such
as
an
this
underline,
character,
you know.
right?
Can I get the third bill? No, that's for Brad Pitt. Well, can I get a and as blank? Oh, we'll give you that.
But there are some really cool. The cinematography in this film is crazy fun. You know, I enjoyed, especially considering when you think of the size of the cameras they were using back then for the film. Some of the shots they get that are really cool, you know, especially a lot of with Quinlan. There's a lot of up angle shots with Quinlan to make him seem even bigger than he is, or we get them close, kind of tight medium shots to where you can see just how like grotesquely looking he is, and how over the course of this film he deteriorates more and more the more we see him as he goes on. He almost seems to get uglier as the film goes on.
He's always There's always like a snarl in everything he says, which is really, really adds to the character.
And he's unshaven here too, is he not?
He looks towards. Well,
I
it
think
looks
he's
like he's starting to
unshaven.
get kind of stubble,
He's
like
un-
in
yeah.
the day scenes the morning after.
But it makes him look
Like he's
even
been
more
up all night.
slovenly, you know.
Yeah.
He just is even less put together. You can almost smell him. That's how awful he is.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
almost smell like the bourbon coming off of him, man. Because that's
I'm sweating Jack Daniels
bourbon
like
sweat
there's no
and-
tomorrow.
bourbon, sweat, and 2-day-old clothes.
Yeah.
I have to go up one
That's-
more flight of stairs to investigate a hotel room. I'm telling you.
Mark, I do appreciate the cinematography in this movie up to a point. I can't remember, was it Jeff? You said that a lot of this is more of an exercise film, a technical exercise than something that's meant to be appreciated as a full narrative feature.
Yeah.
Because after a while, I got so tired of feeling like I was either 2 feet tall or an owl. Like everything is at these crazy low Dutch angles, or they're watching the action from the rafters.
You know what I thought too when I was watching it? I know this is going to sound almost film school sacrilege, because there's room for, imitation and borrowing from other great artists and stuff like that. But it reminded me, as much as they praised Wells for all these things, and it's very well done. And I think he's taking a procedural and adding more to it by putting these characters in rooms, and they're always kind of connecting, and they're never quite gone, and they're always serpentining and snaking about, and all that matches the camera and the movement and the choreography and the story. But it reminded me of a lot of the things that Hitchcock had just done a couple of years earlier. Like some of the techniques he was using in Rope, or even, there was one of the things that he did in his instruction was get rid of Henry Mancini's score. He wanted that sound design, which is great. And the sound design adds a lot to it. And you hear the car horns and the conversation sort of getting closer and farther apart as the camera is sort of keeping up with the couple in different places. But, that reminded me of Rear Window too, where Hitchcock eschewed any kind of dramatic underscore. The only music in that is coming from his torso's record player or the piano player, especially when Grace Kelly goes over and you hear this sort of mournful piano sonata, which kind of matches like, is she going to get killed by Thorgord? So, I mean, Orson Welles was, you can't take away a lot of his brilliance as a filmmaker and all the things he did in Citizen Kane, but this wasn't quite novel as I think a lot of the techniques he used in that movie were. And I think you can also point to Hitchcock using them literally 2 or 3 years earlier, and maybe in some respects more meaningfully than, to your point, Ian, where it's like you're either a pygmy or you're a bird in the tree, because it's like, can we just get a middle distance shot? Although John Ford said in Meet the Fablemans that those middle shots are for shit. Thank you. I'm sorry, David Lynch's John Ford.
Yeah. Well,
never shoot the horizon.
It's funny you mentioned his dislike of the score, because, like I said, this thing has a reproduction of his memos. Page 1, line 1, very passive aggressively. I assume the music now backing the opening of the picture is temporary. Literally the first line. And I was trying to find anything on whether or not, because it's been a while since I've seen the restorations. I don't remember how the potential rape scene was handled. Couldn't find anything on that, but what I did find is that the restored version is a lot better reviewed than this version, to the point where it's referred to as a critical reevaluation. So that might be why.
I mean, part of the problem.
Who version of it before was like, oh my God, we love this movie, and you guys seeing only this one, which may not have been as critically acclaimed, or just like, it was okay.
I enjoyed it, but there were issues. But the fact that there is the other version, and then you look at this 95 or 98-minute version of the film, and when you hear about that, you could kind of tell why. And that's why I wanted to watch the theatrical version for this. One, it's the one on streaming, but two, that's the one that I'm like, yeah, this is the one where you're watching it going, this is a classic. You know what I'm saying? Whereas you've got the 98 version, which, as Joe just talked about, is better reviewed than the original version, because then you're getting, and we've run into that with even modern films, films that we find out there are two different versions, and suddenly you find out, you're like,
the director's cut is all about that, right?
This director's cut or the longer version ends up a lot of times being a bit better, just because the story is more coherent, because they had put these pieces in, and then studio or whoever got a hold of it and said, nah, we don't need this bit. We got to cut the runtime down. Not all of them. I'm not saying all of them, but I'm just saying it still happens today. So it makes me now want to go back and look up the longer version.
It happens with even like the great filmmakers. I mean, there's a story of when Harvey Weinstein saw the cut of Kill Bill, he went kind of apeshit because it was 4.5 hours long or whatever. And he said, let's cut it into 2 films. And that kind of worked. I mean, and then it allowed Tarantino to embellish the second part a little bit more. Though I think you feel the fat in the second version.
You do feel,
but it could have just been a 4-hour movie. But they won't let that happen. It's so funny. I mean, Angels in America, they tried for years to get that made as a movie for the cinema, and no studio was willing to make a 6-hour movie. Wow. And you just think there've been foreign films that have done that, and whatever. I mean, I just saw The Brutalist last week at a screening, and that's 3.5 hours long. And God love the director. He said, we're showing it with an intermission, because that's what they used to do for David Lean movies and some of the longer musicals. And sure enough, halfway through the story, there's a 15-minute intermission, and it works. It's kind of nice. You get up, go to the bathroom, you don't miss anything, talk a little bit of what you saw, and it comes back, and here's this kind of new chapter to it, which is great. But they used to do that all the time with movies. So I feel sorry for these directors and people who can't get their vision on the screen, in the studio interference and Universal thinking they knew better to cut this. And we're going to put Henry Mancini score, and we're going to put all the credits over this. Like, did you look at this? Yeah. The whole set piece is to show that all this stuff is weaving around, and that's going to be the theme of the film. Did you miss that? Yes, you did. But there it was. That's what was released.
They're thinking in terms of how many times can we put it on
Play
the
this
screen in a
movie?
day
Yeah,
when
how
we
many
see the
times?
movie
But
stuff?
they don't ever think that maybe the better version will get people to come and see it
Mhm.
and create a longer time in the
Right.
theaters. I mean,
Well,
that certainly happened
that's
with Sergio Leone when he did Once Upon a Time in America.
just about to
The
bring
cut
that up.
was so terrible, nobody went and saw it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we covered that 2 months
Yeah.
ago, and
Yeah,
That's right.
the
I
2 hour and
listened, but I
30-minute
wasn't
version
participating.
I've heard is terrible. I'm probably never gonna see it. I might watch it at some point if I can find it, just for the just to know why they decided to do it, just to see what it was like. But yeah, it's I mean, it's a thing that bugs me even with movies now, because with a lot of movies now, especially the big studio movies, I feel like the point is to get you in the theater the first weekend, and if it sucks, well, we already got your money.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, that's exactly what it is. And that's the way it's been for a number of years now. Everything's predicated on that opening weekend box office, and anything after that is just extra on the cake. But if they don't make the projections on that first opening weekend, well, and especially nowadays, ever since COVID and the streaming became big, well, 17 days later, it's going to go on streaming, and we'll get people there to pay some money on it. If it doesn't do big its opening weekend, that's why horror, and being the horror fan, I am very happy we're in a horror renaissance over the last 5 years with the comic book films going on, because horror makes most of it, if not all of its money back, and then some opening weekend, and then maybe the second weekend as well. It will make money back and then some. And that's why we see so many horror now, because they suddenly realize, oh, we could make this shit for them, $12 million. And oh, look, it made 30 over the weekend, because horror fans want to see horror films on the big screen.
Yeah, and the other thing, I feel like it's kind of backwards, because my roommate Sean Steffen, who's been on the show a few times, he told me that apparently Amazon isn't worried about the fact that the red one just bombed, because it'll make up the numbers in streaming, and I'm like, that is really backwards. That is a really backwards way to approach it. You want the movie to make money in the theater, and then there's a reason that everything else, home media, were called the ancillary markets, because they weren't the primary source of the money.
Well, and that's the awkward, the weird thing is, I know they're counting on streaming, but I don't know if they're counting on if it's going to be on Prime. Or, I mean, I guess it will eventually free, but if they're just banking on, 100 million people renting it for $3 or $10, whatever it's going to be, closer to Christmas time. But the whole streaming theater pipeline is messed
But
up.
what's interesting too? Streaming costs are now gone up. Even if you have a subscription, like if you're on Amazon Prime, there are some movies that because you're a Prime member, they'll give you for free. But then there's other ones you pay for, and sometimes before it's available for sale. It's only available for sale sometimes too in various platforms too. So there's a number of ways they'll get you. They'll get that $20 ticket from you somehow.
Yeah, my big thing with that is, if I'm going to pay $20 to rent the movie on Amazon, I'm just going to buy the Blu-ray. I'm just going to wait an extra 3 weeks and just buy the Blu-ray.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I mean,
at least
and even
then I keep it. It's on my shelf all the time.
Well, even I rented Touch of Evil from Amazon today. And it was $3.79. I mean, a couple of years ago, it was $2. You could rent some movies, and they used to have the HD versus SD option. They still do, but now they're the same price. It used to be that if it was a $2 rental, then for $1 you could rent the SD version, and most of the times there was no difference especially watching on a laptop. But now it's twice as expensive, and it's the same experience.
And speaking of budget, to bring it back around to our film, the budget for Touch of Evil back in 1958 was $800,000. So let's bring up our conversion.
Even back then, 800.
How much of that went to Chuck?
This had a good cast, so there's a lot.
I'm the producer of this movie as well, and I'm telling you.
When you say Chuck, Jeff, do you mean the beef they used to feed Orson Welles?
Yes. Excuse me. It's in my contract. It's filet mignon or the tenderest part of the T-bone. It's no ground round here.
Man, I remember there was a horror movie in the 80s. It was straight to VHS starring Orson Welles called The Witching. And I remember renting it as a kid. And it was one of those Bird Eye Gordon movies, really cheap.
Oh
And
my God.
clearly Orson did this because he was just going to collect a paycheck so he could put it towards whatever movie he wanted to make that.
Or lunch that afternoon.
Or lunch that afternoon.
Joe,
What was
let me
it?
tell you a
You
quick
were not
story.
Donovan. Oh yeah, go.
He was almost famous for going to the opening of an envelope back in those days. I mean, he would do anything for a couple of bucks.
Yeah.
And one of the funniest ones he did is he did this one of these cheesy documentaries that was in theaters about Nostradamus. And my God, he read that narration like he was narrating King Lear's final speech to his daughters. And I'm just gonna, because I've been doing the invitation all night, and you say, Jeff, one more time, please, before we go. But he's talking about the third Antichrist at the climax of it. And, you know, the way Nostradamus was interpreted is he's wearing a blue hat or something like that, you know. And they have Wells just staring at the screen for probably seconds, like, you don't cut when, you know, just keep that long for the dramatic pause there. And he goes, there you have it. Nostradamus is pointed to the third Antichrist. He will be wearing a blue hat. And it's like, wait a minute, that's my aunt going to church.
with all the gravitas that only Orson Welles could give it at that point.
He will be
Peter
wearing a
Bogdanovich,
blue hat.
at one point, Orson Welles was broke, and he just like moved into his apartment, and he's just sleeping in my. It took over my bedroom, and he's like, what am I going to do? He's Orson Welles. I'm going to tell him to go fuck himself.
It's like
Did you eat the whole ice cream container, Orson? I
And there's
really
the infamous
I got
Gary
into this
Graver.
VD series, and I lost track of time and how many spoons I had.
Well, he was making The Other Side of the Wind, and Gary Graver was the cinematographer.
That's right.
Graver had a job editing a porno, and Orson Welles needed him to shoot that weekend. And Graver's like, I gotta turn this in so I can get paid. I can't just work for you for money that never comes. So Orson told him to get in the shower, and he edited the porn scene for him. I do not remember the name of it right now, but at some point I do want to find it, because there was an article written about it that Orson Welles edited this porn scene to get so that Gary Graver could turn it in really quickly and get his ass on set so that they could continue shooting The Other Side of the Wind. I love that about
We always do these wrong jump cuts that don't match. Before he has his orgasm, I dare say, I'm going to show her anticipatory face and his release face before I show the money shot. Somebody has to learn how to edit these darn things.
I don't know about the Dutch angles, but they definitely had some in Greek. No, I think the name, I'm pretty sure the name of that film you're looking for, Joe, if I had to guess, would be Citizen Kane.
Oh,
There you go. And back to you,
Nicely
Mark.
Done. Nicely
Thank you.
done.
But if anybody out there is interested, Google it, because it'll pop up. It'll pop up with the name of the movie.
idea-
the hardcore
the
film's
modern-
name
the
was
modern
3
era.
a.m.
Oh, 3 a.m. Okay.
The
there we go.
movie's name is 3 a.m. The star of 3 a.m., Georgina Spelvin. Yeah, so apparently he edited her masturbation scene in a shower.
I think we should go around and
because he
each come
needed
up with
Gary
a-
Graver to get up and shoot. It's
and
just great.
build on Ian's wonderful brainstorm. We could
Well,
play
I
a
mean,
game of that.
big-
Like you could have, like, you know, in the nod to the popular incest version state, you could have the magnificent and your sons and daughters.
Well. I mean, he did make Touch of Evil, so this is just Touch of She-Ville.
Touch of Eva. No.
So there you go.
There you go.
We'll make that that hotel room scene mean something.
It's just for reference. $800,000 in 1958 is $8 million today.
So yeah,
So
like it still wouldn't even be that big a
it
deal now.
wouldn't have
Right,
even
it
been
isn't at
that
all.
big of a budget of a film. For
By the
even
way,
back then, but
one last thing, and I'll promise I'll shut up after this because I know you want to get to bed and get done with the show. But the most obvious one is almost staring us in the face, and that is, I think, one of his final films, and that is F is for fuck.
brings new meaning to the word rosebud. Anyway,
Oh,
so now we're
Nicely
Yeah.
done. Nicely done. You know the story about that, right?
yeah.
Apparently, that was William Hearst's nickname for Marion Davies.
Yeah.
And so
Oh.
making that the name of the sled was just like, he's doing the whole damn bio on me and slandering Marion. But that darn sled thing is a bit too far. And yes,
Well,
it
yeah,
was a
but in
bit-
the
a
adult
bit too
version,
far.
it's not a sled; it's a train.
It's
Anyway,
there we
Mark-
go. And now that we've really
Wow.
much like
Nicely done,
much
Ian.
like
Nicely
Detective
done.
Quinlan, we have slowly descended into the darker side of
Well, if it's a
things.
train, then it's Citizens Kane.
Oh,
It has to be
right.
multiple.
Yeah, that's the sequel. That's the sequel.
And just for reference, I won't say no why, but there is a Citizen Jane out there. So with that in mind, we
Indeed.
will
The
wrap
final person who gets his say will be wearing a blue hat.
A Jimmy had.
With that, we're gonna wrap it up tonight, folks. I think we've run the gambit on Touch of Evil. Yeah. So let's just get a final thought with Touch of Evil on. Let me know. Does it deserve its praise? And is this theatrical version worth the praise, or would you recommend seeing the longer version? We'll start with you, Jeff.
See the 98 version, the restored version, the way it was meant to be seen, and put it in context, and you'll appreciate it for its cleverness, the Wells' performance, and him trying to add something to add thematically to a script that is a little bit obvious and maybe full of holes at times, as Ian said. But I think it's worth a look. I think just in the sense of film history, and this was in its time period, kind of a landmark. Trying to be a landmark film. It came 40 years too late to be a landmark, I suppose, or whatever. But yeah, I think it's worth a look. But do the 98 version.
Mm-hmm. Ian, what about you, sir?
Well, I've only seen this version, so
Right.
I'm curious to see the 98. Although there's more scenes, which I don't know. In those scenes, do they replace Dennis Weaver with something else? Because that immediately.
I don't think he's in it as much. I think that scene actually got cut. I think that was one of the ones they added stuff on. They shot a couple things after the fact, and I'm not sure if that was one of them. But it's more interesting, I think, Ian, just in the sense that it doesn't have the score. It has more ambiance, more. So it becomes this sort of character, this whole kind of thing around it that is just sort of enveloping all of them. And I think that goes with the sort of overlapping, snaking around, kind of everything sort of converging and having something to do with the other parts of the story as well. So yeah, I mean, there's some stuff that maybe you'd find just as insufferable, but I think because it feels like it's more intentional and it's working on this sort of metaphorical level, it's a little more interesting.
Well, there you go. I will have to check that out. But
You can fast forward through
regular
the dull
version-
parts.
Well, the regular version, again, as we said tonight, I think I would recommend as someone who's interested in film history, and film technique, can't be beat. As a film to sit down and watch and enjoy, I would say go watch Citizen Kane. You get all that technical innovation, but it's also a character study and just a wonderful story that really kind of gets you in the end. Especially if you don't know what Rosebud is, you're probably going to be floored. But
yeah.
And Joe, what about you? Your final thought?
Well, I'm assuming that Orson Welles probably felt closer to how Ian feels, because you don't write a 58-page memo telling Universal what should have been if you like the version that they released.
Yes.
So I'm assuming his thoughts are probably close to Ian's. Like I said, my first couple viewings of this many years ago were the 98 restoration, and I fell in love with that version. I kind of wish I had more time today, because maybe I could have watched both back to back and been able to answer some of the questions about them. So when I'm talking about everything coming together, maybe in my mind, just remembering little tidbits from the other one that aren't really necessarily on the forefront for me, or what kind of tied it together when you guys are saying there are holes here and there, because it might just be I already knew the story and I already knew where it was going. on a technical level, yeah. Even if you're a budding filmmaker, an aspiring filmmaker, just the first like 20 minutes of this movie alone are like film school. Absolutely. I've loved this movie for like 20, 25 years now. So, I don't know what to think of the 93 93-minute version, because watching it, I was nostalgic for the version that I had already seen.
And you may have, if you've seen the longer version, you could fill in the blanks even subconsciously. So you're probably like,
right.
Oh, okay. I know where this scene is and what led up to it. So
it's like when I'm writing a screenplay and I want somebody to read my screenplay, I don't want to tell them anything.
Right.
Tell me what's missing, because if I tell you what I was going for, your mind might fill that in by yourself, and then that's not good. Yeah. So I kind of feel like that might be what happened here.
And for me, I kind of echo the feelings more with Ian, in that I found it a little bit more interesting than Ian. It is technical aspect, bar none. Watching this cinematography and the elements and the set pieces and all of that, really well done. The character part of it and some of the story. I want to go back, not right away, but I think I'm going to go back and I'll watch the 119 or the 2-hour version, the 98 version of it, just to see how maybe some of those things that kind of got under my skin with this, or had me scratching my head a bit, maybe those questions are answered. But it still should be watched if you're curious. And he literally does the Alfred Hitchcock theory of the audience knowing the bomb is under the table while the conversation is going on. It is the literal translation of that. Got done watching the extras on the North by Northwest 4K Ultra HD release, and they talk about Alfred Hitchcock saying, the bomb is underneath the table and people are talking. That adds more tension, and that's what you have. You have this wonderful tension-filled, almost 8 minutes or whatever it is, continuous tracking shot of our main characters crossing paths that there's a bomb in there. And in fact, the character at one point goes, I'm hearing this ticking in my head. And you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, the wife.
The wife.
And they ignore her completely. It's so much for those guards who are supposed to be making people safe for the border.
Stripper girlfriend. I don't think
I'm just saying.
Wouldn't her husband hear it too, though? Be like, wait, no, I hear that ticking too.
Well, I don't think that was her husband. I think
her
boyfriend.
Yeah. She's one of the strippers.
Lava.
Yeah, but still, that is, and he uses some other Hitchcockian moments in here where you're like, oh yeah, so yeah, I would still say watch it. I can see why it gets talked about and why we're still talking about it today. But the story itself, at least the theatrical cut, could use some work, and that's why I think that 98, the version from 98 that was re-released, the re-edit, really is critical reevaluation needed.
Yeah, when I saw that, I was like, okay, yeah, that's where the disconnect here is, because the two of us that have seen that version are like, this movie's great.
So thank you very much for this little bit longer episode. Hope you've enjoyed our conversation of Touch of Evil. Yes, I used Marlene Dietrich being in it for a reason to talk about this film. I fully admit it. Just like next week's film will be Just a Gigolo, and even though I think Marlene Dietrich doesn't have a huge role in it, it was her last role, which is why I wanted to talk about that film. It was her last movie she was in, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to close the month out with it, and David Bowie. So, I'm just very curious about it. So look for it next week. But now, as always, this is where I give my crew their license to shill. So, Joe, you are first tonight. Floor is yours. Anything to shill, sir?
Well, the only thing I got to show is I'm going to be on Ian's podcast on Wednesday talking about North by Northwest.
Me too.
Which for a long time, up until the last couple years where Vertigo now edges it out, was my favorite Hitchcock movie. So,
well, there you go. Awesome.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And Jeff, go ahead, sir. The floor is yours. License to shill.
You can read me at theestablishingshot.org or pipelineartist.com. I also do 1-minute reviews on TikTok under Jeff York Chicago. and I host or I guest on a number of podcasts that I love the hosts. Two of them are sitting here with us tonight.
Oh,
And Joe, it's so lovely to see your face, not
Great
in the
to see you
Marlon
too.
Brando lighting from Apocalypse Now for this episode.
nice.
I've been messing around with the lighting for this for like months, trying to
It's
get it
much
right.
better.
Never
You
get
can
it.
see,
Yeah,
we can see
yeah.
you now.
We can see you now.
You're seen, Joe.
You're seen. You're definitely seen.
I feel seen now.
and
I'm actually
And
looking you
seen.
up on TikTok right now. So
There you go.
and
Oh,
Ian,
yeah.
by all means, the floor is yours, my friend.
I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com and also right here on YouTube. And I'm also here on Monday nights talking about classic movies with y'all. It's been a lot of fun. And as has been alluded to, Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Central, we're going to be talking about North by Northwest, the Alfred Hitchcock movie, which I have never seen and still have not seen.
Oh,
so I have a
wow.
lot of catching up to do.
Oh wow,
Well, that's exciting.
Ian.
That's
Here-
Young
here's-
at
here's-
you.
The weird thing, I have owned this movie, I think, twice on DVD, or once on DVD, once on Blu-ray, and now on 4K Ultra HD, and I've never watched any of them. These other versions have gone straight to half-price books. It's one of those things where I got it as a gift. I'm like, I'm going to watch this movie someday. I never got it. Now I have the excuse.
Now you've
So,
got
yeah.
the excuse. So yeah, it'll
Wow.
be interesting to hear your thoughts on it. And thank you so much. Please check out all of my wonderful crew members' content. And when you're done there, and if you are bored, go to specialmarkproductions.com for all the stuff that I've done. I've got 3 Discovery editions of the Final Cut dropping this week, where we review the 4K Ultra HD of North by Northwest, the 4K Ultra HD release of The Terminator, and the 4K Ultra HD release of Blazing Saddles. All are dropping tomorrow, and this week you will see my reviews, for better or for worse, of those. I've got some possible interviews in the hopper and some other things going on as well, a couple of reviews and such. So, whatever I do, I don't do a whole lot reviews. So, but, look for all of that and more. And next week we got Just a Gigolo, and December is going to be Nurse month as we look at films with nurse in the title. So that'll be very interesting. And so stay tuned for all that. Thank you so much to all our listeners, all our people who tuned in tonight to our live chat. And now we'll just say a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Right.
Good night. Wait, I'm reading a part for what robot?